So our next guest is Tove. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but Tove Søvndahl Grant. I'm sorry, and she is from Greenland. She is the member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and her term will be from this year, 1st of January until 2022 December 31. So 2 years. Oh, three. Wait, 1, 2, 3 years, and really bad at math. And she has for the last 6 years been a policy officer at the Human Rights Division of the European External Action Service, where she is responsible for a range of human rights files, including the rights of indigenous peoples, and for nearly 3 decades in her capacity as an official of the Greenland government. She also served as the executive secretary for the Indigenous Peoples Secretary of the Arctic Council in the years from 1996 to 2000. So I guess she will be and also she can provide us very good advices, important advices to how to be an indigenous politician, or how can we navigate ourselves in the overall politics. So, and now I hand over to Ghazali.
Thank you so much. I very much agree with you, Jocelyn. Tove, Arctic Council, the Parliament of the Greenland government, sorry, and the European Union. It's a very impressive, resume. So let's take a trip down memory lane, because I also know that you're now finishing up your term over at the EU. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us whilst you're finalizing your work over there. So maybe best question to start with is, because you've been in the Greenland government for 30 years. What is your biggest lesson from being in the Greenland government?
Yes, thank you to Tove and to Ghazali for your introductions, and also big thanks for organizing this very interesting webinar. It's a great concept. Just to sum up, I mean, regarding my resume, I mean, it has taken me 30 years to build it up. So no wonder it's so, large or broad. Now, let me just say that when I started as an official of the Greenland government, it was then still on what we call home rule. And that home rule was then expanded in 2009 to what we call self-government, which meant further competences, and also, most importantly, when it comes to subsoil resources, minerals, oils, etc., but also the recognition of the Greenland people as peoples according to international law with the right of self-determination. So there was a schedule agreed for if and when the people of Greenland wish to secede from the Danish kingdom, the Danish realm, then there is a process foreseen for that. Now, my biggest lesson from being with the Greenland government through 30 years is that self-determination, self-government is a process with many, many dimensions. And it's a process that needs to be internalized within each and every member of your people, and you have to keep constantly build up your capacity, build up education, focus on education of the young, but also lifelong learning for adults, and try to continue securing that the democratic safeguards even within your own people, and to maintain coherence within your own people or among your own people. And in order to maintain that coherence, you also need to focus very much on the everyday life and conditions of each and every member of your people. The reason why I'm saying that is that I mean, just because that we achieve an enhanced self-government where we can determine our own education sector, health sector, housing, production sector, fisheries, everything. It doesn't mean that that all is well. I mean, many people, ordinary people, will continue to struggle financially if there is also not a focus on their needs. And the reason why I'm saying it, that in the run-up to the self-government that we have now, that we got in 2009, you could sense that there was an enormous cohesion among the Greenland, within our people. And there was a lot of optimism and the promise of economic expansion, everyone would get a better life, etc., etc. But then only a few years when the new government was, for many, many reasons, not able to really deliver in terms of increasing the well-being, the social well-being of especially the poorest among us, then there was a sense of discontent started to grow, and which in my opinion was then very much instrumentalized by what I will call ultra-nationalist or populist, national populist politicians. And where today, unfortunately, and that is my very personal opinion, where I see an enhanced polarization within Greenland society, within our own people. And that is very, very unfortunate. And that just, that it just underlines the importance of, I mean, in order to really maintain coherence within your own people, you have to have attention to how people live their ordinary lives and their living conditions, to make sure that everyone is happy, that also individuals' rights are safeguarded. So that was in short what I think is one of the biggest lessons from the Greenland situation.
No, thank you so much, Tove, for sharing that. Because I know that there's participants, or like panelists, attendees to the webinar series, people that are watching are very much interested because they want to elevate or bring back their indigenous government to make it more how do you say it, official, quote unquote, so that they can really exercise the right to self-determination. So like this brief insight is very much helpful. Linking it to that, what is it that indigenous governments or potentially indigenous governments should be paying more attention to in order to become stronger for themselves, and then also hopefully in extension of that, strengthen the movement?
Let me just start by saying that the Greenland government is not, per definition, an indigenous government. It's a territorial public government, but where us Greenlanders, the Greenland Inuit, are in majority. So it is, you can say, it's a de facto indigenous government.
Sure, yeah.
But what should we pay attention to become stronger as indigenous movement? For certain is that we need to, I mean, as I said before, continuously invest in cohesion, but also have strong networks, I mean, with each other, and really, and also invest in also our relations with indigenous peoples in all over the world, and maybe also in particular our neighboring countries, because there is a lot to be learned in exchanging on best practices, lessons learned, etc., and also for generating ideas. I mean, other indigenous peoples may have solutions for something that we know, that we experience, but that we never thought of ourselves. I mean, one example is, for instance, in Greenland, like in many, among many sort of more urbanized indigenous peoples or societies, you see a very, very high level of a suicide rate among the young, and especially among the men, the young men, the boys. And there, other indigenous peoples may have actually solutions that we never really thought about or that we never tried. So that is just one example. Yeah, that in short, this is.
Sure. Just for people's view, like how would you start in terms of like creating a strong network? What would you be looking for in terms of, would you be looking at governments, indigenous governments, or would you be looking at umbrella organizations like Aman, or what would be your process?
I think it's a matter of being as open-minded as possible, not focusing so much on what the status is of the different organizations. I mean, it can be indigenous governments to governments cooperation. It can be indigenous parliaments to other parliaments. It can be, you know, sort of more NGO type umbrella organizations. Anything. I mean, we need to. We need to build a worldwide web consisting of indigenous peoples coming together at many levels, connecting, all sorts of types of organizations, networks of, with different statuses.
Thank you so much. I think that really sticks. I think like we are people that taking on notes. I think that will be a soundbite of you, like the World Wide Web of indigenous organizations, like bringing a strong network. Thank you so much for that. Let's talk about COVID-19, the reality of it. How do you think that it will impact the conduct of indigenous representative institutions?
I think around the world we are, I mean, as Oka just described how they're handling it in Indonesia, but I also heard examples also from other continents how indigenous peoples and their representative institutions or organizations are really exercising self-government or even self-determination in responding to the COVID-19. And I think the successful responses, I mean, will empower further Indigenous-owned institutions. And it will also enhance the visibility of the importance of Indigenous self-determination, self-governance, vis-a-vis states, but other actors also in the sort of mainstream society. What we should also be mindful of is that if we have examples of Indigenous communities, societies that have not been successful, and where you see very high death rates, despite of them, you know, having been in charge of taking on their own measures, then it can also very easily be used against them as a way of saying, you want to conduct your own affairs. How successful were you when you tried to manage the COVID-19 crisis on your own? So I think, I mean, it can go both ways, but from seeing the many good examples of how, I mean, how Indigenous peoples around the world are conducting themselves, I think that Indigenous peoples actually will come out much more, come out much stronger following the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you so much, Tove. Also, a little bit of a sidestep is like you're now finalizing your term, your work over in Brussels. What I'm seeing in the movement is that a lot of Indigenous people see the United Nations as they have it on a pedestal, and they almost like neglect the European Union, whereas its reach is further than within continental Europe. That's why I'm fascinated by how Indigenous peoples undervalue advocacy at the European Union. What would be your pitch, if I can call it a pitch, and for Indigenous peoples to start participating, and in which process would you suggest Indigenous peoples to start engaging?
I would say it's good that the Indigenous people hold the United Nations in such high regard. And in fact, the European Union is also, I mean, part of its founding values is also based on the Charter of the United Nations, and is very, very much dedicated to the United Nations. But what is important to remember is that the European Union is not only the biggest donor in the world when it comes to development cooperation, but also when it comes to support for democracy and human rights. But it's not only in terms of money, it is also a very strong global player when it comes to values, I mean, the respect for human rights and democracy. And it also have policies on Indigenous peoples. And the European Union is present in more than 140 countries around the world in delegations. By delegations, and even in those countries where it's not present, then there is also some sort of a cooperation. I think what is important is that the Indigenous peoples start to pay much more attention to actually engaging at country level with the EU delegations around the world. For instance, when it comes to human rights defenders, I mean, we all know that Indigenous human rights defenders are disproportionately affected by killings and violence. And in this sense, then it's very important to actually reach out to the human rights defenders, liaison officers that there are in each and every EU delegation around the world. But there is also, as part of the bilateral relation between the EU and the individual countries, partner countries, there is also usually some sort of a dialogue going on every year. And those dialogues are also accompanied by dialogues with civil society. And you were there yourself, Ghazali, when we had a roundtable, EU roundtable with Indigenous peoples experts and representatives back in February here in Brussels, and where we actually realized that in those civil society dialogues that the EU organizes in its partner countries, Indigenous peoples organizations or institutions are not really represented. And so here is a job, I mean, real job for Indigenous peoples around the world to actually go meet the EU delegations and say, hey, we want to be part of that, even though we're not technically as civil society organizations, because it can be indigenous governments, but at least it's a foot in the door. But I would also say that, and then of course, I mean, engaging with European Union staff at delegations also gives more visibility when it comes to, for instance, I mean, the EU delegation manages grants, both under the human rights support grants, but also in relation to environment, civil society, empowerment, etc. And by engaging directly with the EU delegations, then staff will also get to know Indigenous peoples better and to understand that, I mean, this is something that we need to pay more attention to. So that in the end will be beneficial for Indigenous peoples. But I will also say that it's also important when, and then I will come back to some of my earlier points, what of course will give Indigenous peoples more legitimacy is that you try to connect as networks so that you are as united as possible also when you meet European Union delegations. Because there is a lot of competition for attention, and I think Indigenous peoples will be more successful if more organizations, networks actually unite, get together when building up their engagement with the EU.
Thank you so much, Tove. Also, I think like for people that know, thank you so much for inviting us for that roundtable. It was very informative both ways, both for the European side, but also for Indigenous people side, knowing like where is the level of knowledge and the level of engagement. And I think like two of the things from Indigenous side, at least, two of the recommendations that we made, if you can call it a recommendation, is one, of course, like a permanent, not permanent, but almost like a permanent form within the European Union, so that we have like a direct link with access, dialogue within the EU. I think that is something that we brought forward, as well as the need for the European Union to also communicate more in substance, but not just as in style, but in substance as well with the Sami. Like the Sami at this point, like not at this point, they are the only Indigenous peoples that are currently situated in Europe. And we saw that there was a lack of like a substantive, strong dialogue between the European Union and the Sami. And I think that is also an outcome of the roundtable being so open, as in like we could interact with one another, ask questions. I think that is something that I would very much encourage, even though like you're finalizing your 6-year term, the European Union to continue doing. Now that you're coming to the end of the 6 years, anything that stood out for you, like could be personally, could be professionally, anything that pops into your mind, like, all right, that was fun to do, or that's when I look back at my 6 years, that is something that I really, a memory that I will hold or cherish. Anything that comes to your mind?
I think, I mean, there are so very many things, but one thing that that stood out is that the knowledge of EU staff across the board is very, very uneven. I mean, there are some who has a tremendous knowledge about it and understanding on Indigenous people's rights, and all the way down to concrete country situations. And then there are others who don't really understand. But what I felt, I mean, what I experienced is that, I mean, in a way, the European institutions are very, very open. So you can actually, as an individual staff, get a lot of influence. And that is one thing that I will, take back. That I think that I managed to, insert a fingerprint or footprint here and there in various policy document, agreements, etc. And also the now new coming, the EU is currently preparing its multi-annual framework, financial framework, and where, of course, also will help the other colleagues manage to get language in on Indigenous peoples, so that Indigenous peoples is actually secured firmly in major policy and financial instruments of the EU. But it will require a continuous push also from Indigenous people's side, and also for you to continuously also reach out to colleagues. I mean, there will still be colleagues when I leave who are working on this, on the Indigenous people's files, and who feels very much committed to the recommendations, outcomes of this roundtable that we had, including on the suggestion in trying to make a sort of more global event of the roundtable we have to a sort of recurring event. No guarantees, but if you keep pushing, I'm sure it will happen one day. Thank you.
Tove, final question. It's okay if you haven't thought about it yet. What are your plans as a member of the Permanent Forum? What is going to be your, and I use this word with Pancho, the special rapporteur already, what is going to be your special sauce, your special ingredient to the mix?
I mean, of course, apart from focusing on those issues where I know that I have fair amount of expertise, human rights, sustainable development issues, then I think one of the things that I would like to work on is to ensure that the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues have an impact at country level, at very global level, and that we are actually able to contribute to and inspire the global dialogue among Indigenous peoples themselves as part of building this worldwide web, as I talked about before, but also to ensure that the permanent forum becomes a little bit more dynamic and become a forum for exchange, for exploring new ideas, for more sort of robust discussions. I mean, as it is now, I mean, all of you who've been to the permanent forum knows that in a way it has become a grievance mechanism, huh? Which there is also a need for, huh? But I think we need to focus on being more operational somehow or other, and I would like to contribute to that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Tove. I know you're packing up over there in Brussels and trying to round everything up. So thank you so much for being with us, and looking forward to meeting you in person. Yes. at the Permanent Forum.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Ciao, everyone.